In this class, we will learn the first Mishna in Perek Hakoines, which is Masechtas Bava Kama on Daf Nun Hey Amud Beis. Let's begin with a general outline of this class. In this class, we will begin with the first Mishna of Perek Hakoines, and the Mishna will discuss four things. Number one, the din of when a person watched his animal properly and when he didn't, and later on the animal went and caused damage. What's going to be the din? Will he be chai for the damage or not? Number two, when the chiyuv is passed on to others, when do we say that a person passes on the chiyuv, the responsibility to watch over his sheep, to another, and when do we say that it's not passed on to another? Number three, when a person is considered to have been careless, when he was careless with his responsibility to watch over his sheep, and therefore he will be chayiv for the damage that they caused. And the fourth and final thing we're going to learn is how a person pays in various cases where his sheep benefited from another's produce. We'll see that there's different ways that a person is going to be obligated to pay for the damage that his sheep caused when they had a benefit from that damage. So let's see now the Mishnah inside in the flowchart form. So since this is just a teaching, the entire Mishnah is only a teaching, there's no discussion over here, the entire class is going to be in a blue box which indicates a teaching. So the Mishnah begins and says, somebody who placed the sheep into their holding pen and he closed it properly and it escaped and caused damage, so he did proper protection over his sheep, however they escaped and caused damage, the din is he is patur for the damage. So the key over here is, did he close the fence, did he close the holding pen properly? That will determine whether he'll be patur or not. Before we continue, we'll just point something out, and that is that the damage in this part of the Mishnah is referring to the damage of regel, trampling. The sheep, one of the sheep or a number of the sheep left the holding pen and they trampled on something and broke it, where the owner didn't have any benefit from it at all. There's no benefit to the owner at all in this case. And therefore, we are only focusing on whether the owner is responsible or not. The only question at hand over here is the owner responsible or not? And since in this case, he closed the pen properly, he's not responsible. However, if it was Shane eating, if these sheep that escaped, they didn't trample on something and break it, but rather they went and ate something that belonged to somebody else, then the owner would have to pay for the pleasure he received or the benefit that he received, because now he doesn't have to feed the sheep a meal, even though it was an accident, as we'll learn in the Sefer. So when it comes to Shane, there will always be, when it comes to eating, there will always be a chiyuv on the owner, regardless of whether he's responsible or not, because what they have to pay is that he saved a meal. So therefore, in our case, where we said that he's entirely patur, it has to be referring to that the sheep had no benefit, the owner had no benefit, and therefore the only question is, was the owner responsible or irresponsible? And therefore, in the first case, when he closed the pen properly, he was responsible and he'll be patur. The Mishnah continues now and says, and if he didn't close it properly, referring to the holding pen, and it escaped and caused damage, he is chayiv because he wasn't responsible. Now we'll move on to the next case in the Mishnah. If the pen broke in the middle of the night, so the gate or the fence was breached, had a hole in it, or if robbers broke it open, so there's basically a hole here in the pen, so and it went out and caused damage, one of the sheep or a number of the sheep went out and caused damage, he is patur. So what we see over here is something interesting, that in the Reisha it says, as long as he closed it properly, he'll always be patur. However, in this case, which is considered compared to the Reisha, the Sefer, and the Sefer it's saying that only if it broke at night, he's going to be patur. However, in the day, he's going to be chayiv. So the explanation for that is, in the Reisha, the animals escape through the door. The person closed it properly. Some of the animals escape through the door. And therefore, there's no reason the owner would be informed, because it's normal for a door to be open. It's normal for a door to be closed. Nobody's going to inform him that the door is open. So he'll be patur whether it's by day or by night, because he was responsible, and there's no way he knows that there's a problem that occurred. However, in the Sefer, the pen broke, and the owner would be informed once it's daytime. People are going to see the hole in the gate, the break in the fence, and they're going to tell him. And therefore, he's only patur by night. At any rate, let's move on now to the next part of the Mishnah. If the robbers, we mentioned if the robbers broke it open, then the owner's patur. If the robbers let the sheep out, then they themselves will be chayiv, because now they are considered to be responsible for the damage that the sheep caused. The next part of the Mishnah says, if he left the sheep in the sun, so this is the case where the person is careless, or if he gave them to a chayrish, a shaita, or a katan, basically to an individual who cannot be held responsible, cannot be relied upon to do something properly, in a sense to be responsible for property's damage. So in those two cases, and it went out and caused damage, he is chayiv, because he was being careless by leaving the sheep in the sun, that they need to find a way to get out, or by giving it to a chayrish, shaita, or a katan, who are not able to be responsible. However, if he gave it to a shepherd, which is an adult, the shepherd takes his place and he is chayiv. Since the shepherd is another adult, he gave it to him. The shepherd is now responsible for any damage caused by the sheep. And now for the fourth and final part of the Mishnah. If a sheep fell into another's garden and benefited from it, the owner pays for the hana. So this is a case where the owner was being responsible and an accident occurred. So over there, really, he should be entirely putter, like we said at the beginning. However, since in this incident, in this case, the sheep benefited from the garden, and therefore the owner benefited, he needs to pay for that benefit. So it might not equal the entire damage. So for example, if they ate expensive food, he'll only pay for a cheap meal, but he needs to pay for something. It's referring to when the fall was an accident, and therefore the owner of the animal isn't fully responsible. He's only responsible to pay for the hana, the benefit that he received. And the type of benefit will be discussed in the Gemara. What's the benefit here? Is it that the animal ate something in the garden? Is it that it fell on something in the garden and it protected the fall? That will be discussed in the Gemara. And if it went down in a normal way to another's garden, that means there was no accident involved over here, then he pays for what was damaged. He has to pay for the entire damage. The Mishnah now explains, how do we pay for that damage? How does he pay for what was damaged? So we'll see there are two opinions. The Tanakama says we evaluate how much a sa'ah in the garden was worth before and how much it's worth now, and he pays the difference. In other words, we don't look at the specific items that were damaged and evaluate their worth, because if you take just a number of items and sell them, they're going to be sold for a much higher rate than if they're sold as part of a larger quantity. So the Tanakama says that we only evaluate that amount relative to a sa'ah. So in other words, if the amount is worth $10, however, as part of a sa'ah, it's only 10%, and a sa'ah is sold for $50, the owner will only pay 10% of $50, which is $5. So basically the point is that we don't look at it as an individual thing sold in that way, but rather as part of something bigger. And if a person sold the entire thing, how much does that section come out to be worth, which will be less than if it's sold individually. So this is the opinion of the Tanakama. Rabbi Shimon says, if it ate ripe produce, he pays for what it ate. If it's a sa'ah, then a sa'ah. And if it's two sa'ah, then two sa'ah. Rabbi Shimon agrees with the Tanakama that if the fruit, the produce is not ripe, then we won't look at it as individual produce, but rather as part of a sa'ah. However, if it's fully ripe, then we look at it as its worth when it was sold individually. And that's the point that comes up now. Rabbi Shimon agrees with the Tanakama in a case where the produce wasn't ripe. And with that, we finish the Mishnah. So basically, there are 4 sections. The first section spoke about whether the person watched the animal properly or not. The second section spoke about if there was a breach in the fence and how the responsibility could be given over to robbers. The third section spoke about when the person was irresponsible and careless, either because he left the sheep in the sun or because he gave them over to individuals that cannot be relied upon and are not expected to be responsible to watch over the sheep. And we also added a case where the responsibility is given over to others when he gives the sheep to a shepherd. And the fourth and final part of the Mishnah spoke about a case where the animal benefited, the sheep benefited from somebody else's produce. And there it depends. If it was an accident and the owner wasn't responsible, he did what the owner is not responsible for it because he was acting in a responsible way, therefore he's not responsible for the damage, then he'll only pay for the benefit. And if the owner was being irresponsible, he didn't watch over the sheep properly, then he'll have to pay for the full damages. And we explained that there's 2 opinions as to how he pays for the full damages. If the produce is not ripe, then everybody agrees that he pays for it as part of a sa'ah. However, if it is ripe, the Tanakama says he still pays for it as if it's part of a sa'ah. And Rabbi Shimon says that he pays for it as if it's sold individually.